Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast podcast. We're from the Niche Cache, the niche-cache.com, home of major Aotearoa sporting yarn and kōrero. Funky old episode this week, Wildcard. Lots happening in the realms of Aotearoa sport, and we do love a little bit of a warm-up kōrero. Just get a bit of mobility, get on the roller, the foam roller. We're just going to roll this one out, get the calves loosened, get that IT band, I think it might be called, up the side of your thigh. We'll get that nice and stretched out because Steven Adams plays a bit of basketball in the NBA, and the Memphis Grizzlies are trucking along. Definitely the most fun NBA team, probably the most fun basketball team in the whole wide world, and that revolves around Kiwi Steven Adams, the toko. Memphis Grizzlies have won 6 games in a row. Steven Adams hasn't played 2 of them. And I'm curious, wildcard, I have seen that Jaren Jackson Jr. has returned to the Memphis Grizzlies team. He's another big bopper. Like, you've got Steven Adams and Triple J, they're your starting props. Ja Morant's the halfback. Desmond Baines, he's the crafty hooker. You know, that is to say, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams, they are the big boppers of this Memphis Grizzlies basketball team. And I'm curious just to get your update on a couple of these inactives for Steven Adams, which means he's missed a couple of games recently, but also how he is doing with the return of Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, the inactives are sort of like, nothing serious, the sort of thing where it's like, if this was a playoff game, he'd be playing, nothing to worry about there. But they are a couple just like niggling injuries that he's picked up during games that have kept him out for more rest purposes than anything, rest and recovery kind of thing. But it is a little bit of a concern when you consider, I think especially that he's had a lot of different things. It's not like one injury. I don't know if that's better or worse, actually, come to think of it. But it's not one injury that's doing the same thing. It's like a hip one game. He's landed hard on his side and, missed the next game with a hip, like a bruising on the hip or whatever. And then I think rolled ankle was the most recent one. He hurt his ankle contesting, I assume, for a rebound. I saw it, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Just little things like that, you play it safe when it's December and maybe you're playing a team that you think you can probably beat without your starting lineup anyway, which like is every team because Memphis hasn't had their starting lineup at any point this season still. The last time they used their ideal starting 5 of Morant, Bain, Brooks, Jackson, Adams. Last time that happened was in the first round of the playoffs, and it stopped because Adams got dropped. They rotated him out for matchup reasons. Then Adams got COVID. Then Morant got injured just before, a few minutes before Adams checked into the next game. So at no point in the Golden State Warriors series did they have their starting 5 even on the court together, let alone all starting together. At no point have they been on the court all together this season either, because Jaren Jackson missed the start of the season. Morant's had 1 or 2 injuries. Little things the same as Adams, where he's ducked in and out. I think Brooks missed a little bit of time, but not too much. And currently Desmond Bain is injured. So at some point Bain will come back and they'll get their starting 5. But so far, more than a quarter of the way through the season, we haven't seen it yet. But we have seen Jaren Jackson Jr. return, and we have seen Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams together in that front court. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in the couple weeks since Triple J returned, Memphis Grizzlies have rediscovered their defensive prowess and intensity, and they're scooping up those rankings. And this is when they're starting to win those games in a row. And I think it might have been the second Kiwi Steve article of the season about the sole fact that they haven't had the starting lineup together, but when they're only missing one of their starting lineup, they've been amazing this year. Like, they don't need all 5. They're still winning when 4 out of 5 are playing. It's when they're down to 2 or 3 out of 5 playing when they've struggled, and their record is considerably worse when that's the case. But, we're talking threes if Adams stepping out for a little bit, but Jaren Jackson Jr. also playing covers that a little bit. It means you can afford to give Adams a little bit of a rest when he's got a niggling hip or a niggling ankle or whatever, and Jackson's come back, shot blocking extraordinaire straight from the off. Ja Morant's hitting 3-pointers like nuts this season as well. Like there's been clear progress from last year. Like you can see ways in which they've got better in all this, and they still haven't peaked because they're still waiting for Desmond Bane to come back and to get their actual starting lineup together. So I think that's a scary team when you think about it that way. Like I think they're second in the West, and they've had 0 minutes and 0 seconds with their top lineup together, and they're still winning games on the trot. Like what's going to happen when they actually get everyone fit and healthy together? That's an ominous sign.
Beauty. Big up the Patreon whānau. Shout out to all the members of the Patreon whānau for supporting the Niche Cage and all our content podcast, website yarns, as well as everything in the email newsletter. Earlier this week, we did a deep dive into the New Zealand Warriors and some of the stuff happening around there ahead of the 2023 NRL season. And the week prior to that, we compared the Blackcaps to England. So those are two hearty Aotearoa Sporting podcasts there for the Patreon whānau. Those are recorded every Tuesday morning, and we do like to base them off ideas and comments from our members of the Patreon whānau. So those podcasts are designed by the Patreon whānau, for the Patreon whānau, and just the beautiful, generous vibes there. The Patreon whānau supporting us directly and keeping all the Niche Cage stuff flowing. To be honest, keeping us alive as well. So big up the Patreon whānau. We appreciate your support. Patreon.com/Our Niche Cage is the best way to support the Niche Cage and all our content directly. Lovely vibes all around there. And also tomorrow is the email newsletter dispatch day. Friday evening, every Monday and Friday evening, we send out an email newsletter via Substack, thenichecage.substack.com. And that includes lots of Aotearoa sport. Earlier this week, we had the Monday dispatch with a update on Tawhara Gapare.
The E's and the A's is tricky there. I've got caught out once or twice already.
Especially when you're dealing with a lot of Polynesian names. Then you get a similar name, but it's an African style. It's a bit tricky, but also Charlie Sledger-Walker, two of the best Kiwi basketballers in the world right now, to be honest, but also two of the best definitely the best Kiwi basketballers in college basketball over in America. So good tie in there with Stephen Adams, and the Wildcard mentioned that in the variety show as well. But prior to mentioning in the variety show, he wrote about it in the Monday email newsletter dispatch. Tomorrow, might get some Ford Trophy yarns, might get some White Ferns yarns in that email dispatch as well. Those are the type of things, lots of little Aotearoa sporting notes and nuggets in the email dispatch via Substack, thenichecage.substack.com. All the podcast information is found there, as well as the links to our website and the latest yarns we have published on our website as well. Pick up that website, theniche-cage.com. Check in there every day or every couple of days for something new. And Wildcard, we start our podcast with a dose of mindfulness. Holla back.
Yeah, Ram Dass again this week because I have an app of Ram Dasses, and when I don't have already an existing the dose of mindfulness to throw up there, I just dip into that one nice and quickly. It's my backup option. There's a good one here from Mr. Ram Dass. Wise beings can be peaceful in the midst of chaos, experiencing delight in the changing play of forms. I think the second half of that is interesting, but the first half especially, wise beings can be peaceful in the midst of chaos. That feels very like watching Lionel Messi or Kylian Mbappe at the World Cup, etc., kind of thing. Or Kane Williamson playing a ball that's swinging away from him, just guiding it down to third man for a cheeky single to get off strike.
Or Kane Williamson remaining calm as captaincy chaos reigns around him. What was the second bit of that mindfulness? So the peaceful among chaos, I think that's just a basic idea of, that's it, like mindfulness, meditation, whatever practice you want to put in place is designed to do that, keep you peaceful among the chaos. And then when you're peaceful among the chaos, you can see clearly, you can think clearly, and you can feel clearly, which during chaos can be quite helpful.
extremely helpful. When you think about like the way people use a word like practice about this stuff, like your meditation practice, it sounds a lot like practice which you do in between games as an athlete, right? Like your midweek trainings kind of thing is practice. It's you think about it from that, because that's not necessarily what they mean when they say meditation practice. They mean practice in terms of like the art of doing something. But if you think about it from that other meaning, it is preparing you for those moments when you are in the midst of chaos, and when you need to, if you keep a level head and make wise decisions, then you are going to cope with that chaos better than the people around you, and you're going to become a leader in that moment, and these kind of things. The other half of it was that wise beings can be peaceful in the midst of chaos, experiencing delight in the changing play of forms, which goes beyond just coping with the chaos, doesn't it? And it becomes sort of like embracing it and even enjoying it, experiencing delight in the changing play of forms.
We'll keep it wiggling. I don't want to obviously we could go deep into that, but I'd like just what comes to mind is we're in pretty chaotic times at the moment, and if like I have been aware of how every day there is some sort of new chaotic thing.
Yeah,
there is like you just when you think things couldn't get any crazier, the All Blacks sponsor is caught up in corruption, right? Like just when like it just example like the worldwide chaos, there's just another thing happening the next day. And when you're in the peaceful among that chaos, the changing form is just change and how things are happening around you, and their change is constant. But you're also just aware of that change, and you're just aware of how things are escalating and moving forward. And I think you can find joy in that just through that awareness of what is happening.
which is a lot of what we kind of do as well. Is something chaotic happens in the sporting realms, we try to. That's always the attempt. I'm not saying we can do this perfectly, because don't think anyone can. But we make an attempt to stay level-headed and offer context, whether it's not an excuse for something crazy happening. It might just be a like, well, this is why that happened. It's unfortunate, but here's why the Warriors lost this week, or whatever. Or just trying to, yeah, the level-headed response, rather than your clickbaity immediate emotional responses feel like the opposite of this. But unfortunately, that is also level-headed, because that's a deliberate attempt to catch on to. No, yeah, it's not chaotic on the form of the New Zealand Herald. It's chaotic on the form of them knowing that their readers are chaotic, and therefore here we go.
We're beating around the bush here, Wildcard, because of course
Chaos happened.
Kane Williamson has stepped down as Blackcaps Test captain. Tim Southee takes over, and old Tommy Latham, I think, stays on as vice captain. And to your point, there is a bit of sadness in my loins, like just a bit of sadness, like, oh, Kano.
Is that where it's stored?
Just in all around the loins.
Yeah.
Loins, I mean my human meat sack, which is a terrible my human body form.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as I come around to it, I think it's just a good little change of seasoning. It's just a sprinkling of something fresh for this Blackcaps Test team. And like Kane Williamson's still going to be there, and he's still going to be ODI captain. He's still going to be T20 international captain, but he's still there in the Test team. He can focus on his batting, and all we want Kane Williamson to do is score an absolute monster truck full of runs. And whatever leads to that, I'm fine with. But also, I don't think there is anything wrong with just a slightly different style of leadership. Nor do I think that it's a single figure. You've still got a leadership by committee situation there. Sure, Gary Stead isn't Brendan McCullum, but he is a coach. He is the coach of the team. He is instrumental in setting up the team's culture and how the team wants to play. And I think maybe just for someone like Kane Williamson, this just might be a better role for him. at the moment where he can just kind of sit back. He's still going to add his 2 cents. He's going to offer advice. He's going to be called upon to offer advice. Like Southee is going to go to Kane Williamson for his ideas. But he can just kind of sit in the background, score lots of runs. It's all good. He's still there. And I can see how this could be twisted in a very dramatic manner as some sort of detrimental thing to New Zealand cricket. But again, I think from a bigger picture perspective, bird's eye view, I believe this is another case of New Zealand cricket and the Players Association working together to get the best result. Yes, it does seem like some of the stuff, like maybe it's Martin Guptill getting shafted after the T20 World Cup squad announcement was made all about him. Then he doesn't get selected for the T20 World Cup. Like, those instances still happen. This is elite sport where those selection calls have to be made. But I think if you look at a lot of this Blackcap stuff, they're just looking for the best. It's a collaboration. And they're looking for the best situation for both parties. And I think as I talk through this, that's where the retirements come from. That's where the opting out of the contracts come from, because I think New Zealand cricket and the players, they just explore their options for the benefit of all. Like, when a player opts out of his contract, his Blackcaps contract, he is not doing so as part of a bitter dispute with New Zealand cricket. These players are retiring, or they're opting out of their contracts in a collaboration with New Zealand cricket. Obviously, the retirement one's a bit different. Like, Colin de Grandhomme probably wasn't going to be selected in any of these teams. So cool, you can retire. That is one way for you to be released. Like, I think it's more about the retirement as a means to an end to get into a different situation.
Yeah, it was for him, definitely.
And instead of a bitter argument between these parties, they just go down the options. Oh, you can do this, we can do that, you can do this, we can do that. What is the best thing for us moving forward? For some, it might be a retirement. For others, it's opting out of the contracts and still playing for the Blackcaps. And I think maybe, I really don't think the Blackcaps or New Zealand cricket would have pushed Kane Williamson out of that position. But they might have had some ideas. And Kane Williamson might have said, it's just a lot of mahi. Like, you got to do a whole lot of extra shit. And maybe Kane Williamson can also see that a slightly different style of leadership might be required. So then these parties just come together and they find the best solution. And I think that is something that is an encouraging aspect of all this Blackcap stuff we have witnessed over the last 6 months or so. Most of it, I believe, in kind of reading the tea leaves, or reading the scraps of coffee in the coffee cup. Shout out to the esoteric coffee cup readings. Doing that, I believe that it's an encouraging situation where New Zealand cricket and the players work together to find the best thing moving forward. And I think it's more a case of that than anything dramatic, even though it can appear and feel extremely dramatic. Like, a lot of the headlines are going to be very dramatic about this situation. I think it's, whether it's the Trent Bolt one, whether it's the Jimmy Neesham one, who else? Is there anyone else who, de Grandhomme retired?
I mean, Taylor retired. That's not quite the same thing. But you could at a stretch lump that in as kind of a changing of the guards type thing, but it's not. Yeah, I guess just Guptill being pushed aside is sort of a different version of the same thing.
And even like, so there's a bit of a, why not Latham as captain? Again, it's a leadership by committee. Like, who cares who the captain is? Who cares who the vice captains are? They're all going to say something. They're all going to participate in the leadership of the team in the same way that I don't know. I think you kind of referenced this earlier in the week about how it's about the England stuff maybe being less McCullum or more
Yeah.
Stokes or something like that. I'm kind of thinking like it's like Ben Stokes needs senior players around him buying into it. He needs a team to be able to execute his vision as a cricket captain, and he needs coaches and selectors to participate in that as well. Like everyone loves to put it up on one person. It's the Ben Stokes revolution. It's Bazball, where the reality is it's everyone. It's this Harry Brook geezer who is just smashing. Like he's scored the most runs in that series with the highest strike rate. He is the bloke smashing the runs. It's not Brendan McCullum. So in these situations, I think it's the culmination of everyone chiming in with this under the same alignment, under the same strategy. But I think we can simplify things down to one person far too often. And I think in the Blackcaps case, this is often negative about Kane Williamson. Because anytime the Blackcaps fail, it's about Kane Williamson's captaincy. Right, the T20 World Cup, the Blackcaps are losing. Kane Williamson's scoring the most runs, but it's Kane Williamson's fault. So we do like to simplify things down to one player or to one coach. Like, let's be honest, players are more important than the coach, but a lot of old middle-aged people love to highlight the coach because that's their peer.
Also, that's something that crosses over a lot in other sports, which maybe cricket isn't quite so thing. But I think your point as well about the peer group thing is very true as well.
And it's so negatively, this has been applied to the Blackcaps and Kane Williamson. And I think we're going to see, like, it's just a bit of everyone. The culture of the Blackcaps is set by Kane Williamson, Tim Southee, Trent Boult, Neil Wagner, BJ Watling, Laturu Taylor. It's a group of senior players who lead that culture. Those, like Latham, Southee, Williamson, they're still there. Wagner might want to be there as well. Who knows? We'll find out after we record this podcast when the Blackcaps Test squad to tour Pakistan will be announced. We'll probably be finished recording by then, but there will be probably go do a big yarn about it tomorrow morning. All of which is to say, Wildcard, not too fussed about this. Like, I've definitely gotten over my initial sadness, but I think it's just going to be business as usual.
Yeah. First of all, is there actually such thing as an esoteric coffee reading? Is that just a sharp turn of phrase on the cuff, or is that something that people actually do?
Coffee cup readings are definitely a thing. I think by nature they are esoteric because you're looking at coffee granules. Like you swirl the coffee in your cup, and then it's just like apparently some people can read. Like same with the tea leaves. You just like wiggle it around, and then you read whatever's there. Same with anything else. It's just a story that you made up, right? Like slight tangent, bit of a mindfulness.
Go for it.
It's just the story you made up. And we tell ourselves stories every single day. Like we make excuses for ourselves, or we do the opposite and we big up ourselves with a story, none of which is actually based on facts. It's just our interpretation of the fact that leads to the story we are telling. And that's no different to the story you're being told about anything else. Cool.
Yeah. I feel that way often about like horoscopy type things, which I don't have a massive amount of time for, but I do find definitely the star sign aspects of it quite interesting. And I wonder how much like I don't have much of a belief that people are actually predicting the future events. You just keep it vague and people fill in the blanks themselves and connect the dots, and that's where people come up with that. But I do think there's an element of it's not predicting the future, but it is influencing behavior into the future. So you read one thing and maybe you act a certain way in a situation later on, which is the bit where it has an influence on your life. And that's quite helpful sometimes, just giving you a little nudge or helping you make a decision or things like that. Coffee cup granule reading seems like very American, though. That seems like very much of like a can't they let us tea drinkers have anything for ourselves kind of situation. But anyway, I digress. I was thinking about this Williamson captaincy thing as it happened, as I was watching a World Cup semi-final. And then I thought about it a little bit more while I was having a shower afterwards before we recorded. And I came up with 5 ideas that I thought, like 5 bullet point ideas that I were to sum up my reactions. And as you were describing things there, I extended that into 9 bullet point ideas. The other one's pretty short, but the first one was definitely what you said about this being a leadership group. And I think that is like, I mean, you see it any time when the Blackcaps are, they need a wicket. It's not just Williamson barking orders. It's like 4 or 5 of them huddled up, throwing out ideas. And I suspect that a lot of the time it wasn't Williamson's ideas that were being implemented. It was Southee speaking on behalf of the bowlers, or Bolt or Wagner or whoever. Tom Latham as a batter / wicketkeeper, not so much in test matches, but he still has the ability to think from that point of view, etc., etc. I suspect Devon Conway will be a part of these conversations a lot more moving forward. I suspect Daryl Mitchell might even be as well, as a relatively experienced, settled player now. Tom Blundell certainly in test matches will have a say. Like all these guys. The thing about the Blackcaps is they're a really experienced team. It's very hard to get into the Blackcaps test team, especially before your 30th birthday as like an established every game player. Basically doesn't happen much anymore. All these guys have firm ideas about how to win cricket games. The team has an established culture that they're built from. It's not just about one person's leadership. I don't think it's such a dramatic... It is a dramatic change in that it's no longer Williamson as the captain, but it's not nearly the dramatic change as it is of going from Root to Stokes, or from Kohli to Sharma, or from Smith to Cummins, or whatever. That's actually I'll chuck that in as the second point, is that you now officially don't have any of the big 4 captaining their teams anymore, although Steve Smith did get a little nudge recently, didn't he, as a backup captain? But that's a point too. But yeah, the leadership group will take care of that. Point number 3. Which one should I do next? Continuity. Well, they're not in order is the problem. Continuity. So Williamson has missed a lot of games through injury now and then. That means that whenever he doesn't play, someone else comes in and captains, the different voices being heard and whatever. The leadership group, again, still covers a lot of that. And I think maybe the biggest problem of Tom Latham's captaincy when Williamson wasn't there was that Williamson wasn't there as a batter. It's not about who's captain. It's about the fact that you don't have your best batter in the team. Hence, you're not as good. But I will chuck that out as point number 1, 2, 3, whatever I'm up to. Tom Latham's captaincy record, replacing Williamson, who I think has won 22 out of 38 test matches, has the best winning percentage in the history of the Blackcaps. Tom Latham, I believe, has captained for, I think it was 10 games, and he's won 4 and lost 6. He's actually not good. Like he's done quite bad. As I say, I think a lot of that is because he only captains when Williamson's not playing. And if you don't have your best player, you're going to be a worse team, more likely to lose. But that is a point. Well, Latham, and when thinking about Southee getting the gig over Latham's record as a test captain, not fantastic. In fact, kind of bad. He captained when they lost to Bangladesh. He captained the loss to South Africa. I think there was the tour of India recently where Williamson played the first game, drew it. Latham captained the second game because Williamson was out, and then they got thrashed. But Ajaz Patel took a bunch of wickets, which leads me into the next point. Maybe Tim Southee will be better at using spin bowlers. Like Kane Williamson, that's probably the biggest weakness of his captaincy. Doesn't really know how to... It's not that he doesn't know how to use the spinners, it's that he doesn't really know how to attack with the spinners, or he just chooses not to. Think that is the point. Tim Southee very well, think about a dude who's played a lot in Northern Districts who have produced the best spinners over the last decade in the country. Like Tim Southee knows what he's doing there. Also think this is interesting because I'm not sure that until becoming Test captain, Southee was an automatic first 11 player in the Test team in every condition. Like he absolutely is if they're playing at home. He absolutely is if they're playing in England and probably in Australia. Not necessarily in the subcontinent, but I think that says a bit as well about Trent Boult is likely not to be going on those kind of tours again. That means if it's no longer a thing about Boult or Southee, Southee's playing all those games, and I do think Southee actually is as useful as anyone if of the options that they have in those kind of conditions. So I remember he took a 5 for in one of those games in India, didn't he? So he actually has quite a good bowling record in India, I'm pretty sure. So this locks him on as playing every test in every condition, I would imagine, for the duration of his captaincy. Also, just like their next idea, 3 to go. I like the idea of having a bowler as a captain. I just think that's a Pat Cummins, Ben Stokes have had a lot of success recently as doing that. I don't think that's the stigma it used to be. And I think Southee is someone who, leading into my next point as well, about this being sort of like shaken up of maybe perhaps a little bit of complacency. Southee is going to be more aggressive. He's going to be a little bit more of a gambler in charge. And I don't think it's a bad time for the Blackcaps to be embracing that kind of thing. Plus, I just think Southee will really embrace this idea. I think he really wants to be a captain, enjoys when he gets to be a leader. I think probably quite thrives when he gets to be a leader in those situations. And I think it's something that'll potentially bring out the best in him. It's one of those things where you get the players like that who you feel it's not necessarily obvious captaincy material, because you think of the dude who just wants to take a review every time he's got half a shout of a LBW, or maybe he's a little bit too reckless to be a captain. Often what you get is when those characters become captains, that it irons out the loose bits and they just become good captains. Like I've seen many an example of that. I think Wayne Rooney at Manchester United is a good example of someone who really blossomed as a captain. And I think at this stage of Southee's career, he's probably something he's going to embrace, because it's an opportunity that won't come around for him again. Whereas for Latham, it might, he'll probably just be the captain after Southee retires. He's a few years younger. And then the final point is that a very important thing to note is it does sound a lot like this was Williamson's decision. He hasn't been pushed. He's chosen. It's obviously a collaborative decision with New Zealand Cricket and probably the PFA, and of course his coach, and of course I suspect players around him as well, Southee and Latham included. But he hasn't been told, we don't want you as captain. He has decided the workload is excessive. I've had a few too many injuries. I've had one recurring elbow injury, basically. And maybe it's just better all around. I don't think there's a better captain than Kane Williamson in general. I don't think Southee's an improvement, but I also don't, that's the thing, like it's going back to the first point and what you already said, you don't lose Williamson's guidance because he's still playing. He hasn't been pushed out. He hasn't been like offended. He hasn't been chucked over the cliff. He hasn't got to the point where he says, okay, well then I don't want to play. Like remember how they handled the Taylor to McCullum captaincy handover. This is not that. You still got Williamson as a batter, as a captain. Not as a captain, but as the ideas that I was going to say infiltrated. That's the wrong word. The ideas that highlighted his captaincy. He can still chuck out all the exact same suggestions. It's just Southee gets to make the final decision now. So I'm surprised by it, but I'm not shocked by it. And I don't think it's. I suspect, like you said, it's going to be treated as a far more dramatic outcome than it actually is in practice.
The next step is the most interesting because any change between Williamson to Southee is going to be evident in how they play in Pakistan. Kind of because you might see Southee be more aggressive in conditions that do favor batting by the looks of it, but also the using the spin bowlers. Williamson did captain that might have been McCullum maybe when they went to UAE and they defeated Pakistan with Somerville and Patel taking wickets. So it was probably Williamson, but
no, that would have been Williamson because that would yeah.
So in those situations, Williamson has done the right job, but I'm just curious, how does the change in captaincy look when you're going to Pakistan? Again, tying this in with England and Pakistan, we are now going to Pakistan just after the whole England shebangs happened with a new captain who may also have different ideas about deploying spin bowling, because I do think generally Kane Williamson, he's not an aggressive character. New Zealand has done aggressive things in Test cricket. Like Williamson is still going to go bowl short. Like he did bowl short with Wagner and whoever else and set funky fields and try to take wickets and try to move the game along. Like Williamson has done that without Brendan McCullum in Test cricket. But I do think his spin tactics are a bit passive and a bit defensive. So how does that look under Southee in conditions where spin bowlers are probably going to be the most important bowlers for the Blackcaps? And also on Southee, dude's just kind of getting better as he gets older, you know? He is now the biggest benefactor of Trent Bolt's
Yeah, I think that's sure.
Sure. He's getting way more he'll get way more opportunities, and those opportunities have directly led to him being the Test captain. So it's like, yeah, cheers, Bolty. I'm Test captain now, you know? Like the Northern Districts trio, they're just handing shit over to each other, you know, and fair enough. Like that's what everyone would do. You got a couple of mates that you've grown up playing cricket with. You're the best players in the world. You're going to be working hand to hand with each other. So Bolt departs.
Look out for the bros. There you go.
Yeah, that's all it is. Like it's just part of the thing.
Funny thing on that as well, because remember the Guptill thing at his old primary school or whatever it was, and then next thing he doesn't play a game at that tournament and gets dropped the very next thing. After we finish recording this, I suspect because the squad will be named, and then I think they're doing like some media opportunities at Lincoln, where they're training as a group. So that is in Christchurch or Canterbury region. And Tom Latham didn't get made the captain. And then there might be a little bit of a contrast there of them picking the wrong places to go. I mean, if they'd gone to Mongakaramea to announce Tom Latham as captain, that would have been quite funny instead of Tim Southee. But, you know, they should go to Mongakaramea, though. It's a nice place.
For those who don't know, that's where Tim Southee's from.
It is, yeah.
Correct, yeah. And Latham, obviously, from Christchurch as well. We do have Ford Trophy being played at the moment. Absolute six-a-thon down in Wellington. And Otago defeated Canterbury, which is pretty interesting. At the moment, we've got Central versus Auckland. A repeat of their fixture a couple of days ago. Plenty of Ford Trophy content on the website. Got the debrief from that first Central versus Auckland game. Then yesterday's games, both of them are live, as is the Canterbury deep dive, which resulted in them being defeated by Otago. Otago bowled them out for 160, and Canterbury's lineup was like Nichols, Bowes, Daryl Mitchell, Tom Latham, Cole McConchie, Cameron Fletcher, and so on. So that was an interesting game. But that is to say, there's plenty of Ford Trophy content on our website at niche-case.com. And there's always Ford Trophy notes and nuggets in the email dispatch as well. Also got the White Ferns taken on Bangladesh. Second ODI was rubbed out due to rain. Papatuanuku and Ranganui are getting busy around Aotearoa at the moment. Not much to say about that White Ferns versus Bangladesh series. I think the White Ferns are just ticking things over in the ODI format. No real insights or whatever to add there. If you do want to learn about the White Ferns, make sure you check out the T20 series debrief, because T20 cricket is the most important format for the White Ferns ahead of the T20 World Cup. And after this series, we do have Women's Super Smash as well. So all of that stuff is on our website, and there's plenty of notes and nuggets in the email newsletter coming out tomorrow, Friday. New Zealand Breakers wildcard. They are playing tomorrow night, Friday night. They had a loss last time round.
They've had two losses in a row.
Two losses in a row. And Friday they are playing Perth, which is one of the teams they lost to, I imagine. Was that the Corey Webster game?
Yeah, that was the Corey Webster game, yeah. Wind them up and let them loose. And then the other game they lost to was the Sydney Kings, who are the best team in the league. So there's not really any shame in either of those losses, and they were good, tight, competitive games, so no dramas, no?
The Breakers are second on the ladder still, which is useful, 11-5. Perth Wildcats, they are sixth, and they are 8-7, but it's an away trip. The longest away trip in sport, right? Like that's still
along with the Phoenix
derby
versus Perth, yeah. I
The
don't
old
think there's anything. I don't know if like maybe there's a game in Russia where you start right on the east, can play on the west. I don't know, but I would imagine it's got to be up there as far as a domestic game goes as well. So yeah, that's nuts.
So I think the Breakers will be eager to get a win over in Perth, especially after Perth defeated them in Auckland. Perth have won 3 games in a row. Breakers have lost 2 games in a row. And there is another game on Wednesday next week against the Brisbane Bullets. What new ideas have you got about the Breakers as far as just dealing with these 2 losses recently? Because it was kind of firing on all cylinders there for a while, and when you're firing on all cylinders when no one really expected you to, like, you just continue the metaphor, you're just in blast off mode. You're just shooting up into the sky. Then you do deal with a couple of losses as a slight reality check. Is there anything from those losses that is concerning you, wildcard, moving forward, or is it just the flow of a season, lose a couple games and bounce back and get back into it?
Yeah, not really anything concerning, I don't think, because Perth's record doesn't reflect where they are now, because they are a team that's finding a lot of form at the moment. Corey Webster again had a game winner in the game after that, the start of this week. So, like, they're doing all right. Like, that's a strong team. And they hit some tough shots. Like, if Webster in particular hit some tough shots in that game. It's not like the Breakers capitulated defensively. They just, sometimes there's nothing you can do. The ball just goes in. You got to do it as closely as you can, but if the shot goes up, it might go in. And if that happens too many times, well, there will be games during a season where even good defensive teams have that problem. And it's notable that the Breakers, even after 2 losses, are still averaging less than 80 points per game against them. Like, they still have comfortably the best defense in the league. And as for the Sydney Kings, they're just the best team. Like, they were always the best team. They just played fewer games than the Breakers, which is why the Breakers were ahead of them on the table. Kings have started to catch up, and they've beaten the Breakers a couple times this season. I think they've played twice, and Kings have won both. So, defending champions as well. Let's not forget, they're like, Sydney Kings are not just the best team this year; they were the best team last year too. It's an established team, whereas the Breakers have gone from being the worst team to being one of the best teams. And it was nuts writing about them this week, where it's like the defensive stats from last season to this season. It's like the mirror image. It's like everything is flipped completely. They're like the worst in every category. That, like, the worst in the field goal percentage against them, the 3-point percentage against them, the points per game against them. They've gone from comfortably the worst in the entire league to now the best in the entire league in one off season. Craziness. I know there actually has been quite a bit of player turnover. It doesn't feel that way because they've brought back guys like, Vodanovic has played for the Breakers before. I think Liafra and Dan Fotu probably would have been development players once upon a time with the Breakers, or at least they're, well-known Kiwi players from the domestic league is what, anyway. So it doesn't feel like there's been as much turnover as there actually has. 3 new inputs. I think it's only 4 players that were there last year. So more than half the squad has changed. Plus there's a new head coach, even though it's a new head coach who was the previous assistant. It's pretty obvious that the regime under Modi Mayor is very different than the regime under Dan Shamir, not the least of which being that they win games now. They didn't do that before. Players are happy and engaged and locked in and, playing unselfish basketball and chipping in defense. Because that's the thing about defensive mentality, is it is actually an unselfish way of playing. Like, that's quite. I was thinking about this when I was writing. I didn't really put this in the article, but I think it's the case in most team sports, is where, like, to keep the American terminology going, the offense is about getting the best out of your best players. And I think defensive stuff is often about protecting your weakest links, not necessarily your weakest players. It might be that. It also might just be that as a unit, you have a certain deficiency, and how can you cover that so the other team can't exploit it? Like there's kind of it's kind of opposite. One is about the strongest link in the chain. One is about the weakest link in the chain. Like encouraging the strongest point versus protecting the weakest point. I think that often is the case. I definitely, if you're watching like World Cup games at the moment in the football, there's easily the obvious thing. It's like Argentina don't have to be this amazingly well-constructed attacking team playing like Manchester City ball, like Pep Guardiola styles or whatever, with intricate passing moves and everyone knows exactly where to be. No, they just got to get the ball to Lionel Messi in space. You know, it's you don't have time to coach that kind of stuff in internationals, which exacerbates this even more. And then defensively, the best teams have been the teams that don't have a weak point. You can't dominate them in the air. You can't play through them. You can't do this or that. Like they're not like the Croatian backline. None of them are superstars, but they were so good. Like the Moroccan backline, none of them were superstars, but they were really good because they played as a team, as a unit. And the Breakers have got that this year where everyone chips in defensively. Like there's a mentality that goes from the top dude on the roster to the bottom dude, like to the development players. Because I actually looked at defensive ratings in the team, the 3 best defensive ratings in the team. I think Alex McNaught, Sam Timmins, and I think it was Dan Fotu. So these are guys who are mostly playing garbage time minutes, which you could easily imagine garbage time minutes at the end of the game. You're up 10 points or whatever in the last minute or two. This is why those guys are getting on at that point. Not exclusively, but you know, they're guys who are playing shorter minutes. So that's part of the thing. You could easily imagine no one's quite focused. The result's done. This is the rare opportunity. Let's just run the court, get lots of shots up. That's often what happens. You see really high offensive ratings because players are just coming in and shooting quickly, not working down the shot clock, not getting the best positions. It's just like, here's my chance. I want to at least score a bucket. I don't know when this chance will come again. The Breakers have guys who are playing in those moments who have very high defensive ratings. Well, very low defensive ratings, which means very good defensive ratings. Trickiness always when you flip the things around. That suggests to me that it's like a straight throughout the thing. This is a team mentality. You're not going to get away with, even in minutes that don't seem to matter, you're not going to get away with dropping standards. And that is an unselfish way to play basketball, as opposed to what we've seen from the Breakers in the last 3 years in particular, where it's about Nick stars and like Finn Delaney, he's so good, he's going to play in the NBA and things like this, which isn't coming from Finn Delaney himself. But that's like, this is words you're hearing out of the Breakers organization. And some of that's hyping them up, and some of it's also like pumping up, I think, reflecting a more individualistic mentality. Definitely that's the case with Nick stars who would like leave halfway through because it's like, well, I've got to go do what's best for me. And of course they do. Like from their point of view, they do. That's what they're there. The thing is, the Breakers hired guys whose priority was to get into the NBA rather than priority is to win an NBL championship. And that's not what you see from the Breakers anymore under Mody Maor. You see he's brought in personalities who want to be a part of a team rather than to promote themselves or come in and be like, yeah, Aussie basketball, I can score 30 points a night. Let's do this. He's brought in guys who are like, no, I can play defensively locked in every possession. And if I get my points, I'll get my points. If I don't get my points, as long as we win, I'm happy. Like that, you hear this kind of thing from all of 3 of their imports when they talk. And of course, it's going to be like you sort of already know it's going to be the case of someone like Tom Abercrombie leading the show for the locals. And Isaiah Liafa is someone who might hit 5 3-pointers in a game and top score. Like he did that in there. I think it might have been, there's at least one game he did that in anyway. He also might score single digits, but the team might win and he gets 3 steals and he's probably just as happy. You know, there's a mentality in the team under Mody Maor that was not there recently. Well, I mentioned this in the article, so I'll say it again. Like, I wonder how much of a connection that I hesitated to do it, but I wonder how much of a connection there is between that and the fact that owner CEO Matt Walsh has been overseas for, you know, family reasons. So best wishes to the Walsh whānau and whatnot, but he's been overseas doing his job from a distance and back in America. I wonder how much that's made a difference when you think about how hands-on he was in terms of pushing the changing culture in this organization over the last 3-4 years. The fact that now there's not that off-field guy who's also thinking about the commercial side of things, doing a lot of media and whatever. Like Mody Maor is basically taken that vacuum, and he is the face of the team. He is the voice of the franchise now. He's the guy who leads the way and sets the tone. And he is all about the basketball on the court and winning games and whatnot. Like, I wonder how much of a difference that has made to the Breakers. I suspect it's not an insignificant one.
What you're saying about the Argentina football, I'd like to extend that out, because when you watch Argentina play, Messi does a lot of walking, right? But Argentina don't need him to run in defense, because they have other players who do that work for him. And they have, like, you didn't actually reference Argentina's defense. You mentioned Argentina's like just.
But I could have, because
But Argentina has a good defense because their defensive system is designed to absorb the fact that the best player in the world, perhaps the greatest footballer ever, doesn't need to do the defensive mahi, because he's so good that when he gets the football, bang, it's 0 to 100. He's going to set up a goal. That's all good, as long as you have the awareness of how you're building your team around him. The Breakers, well, for starters, as we've said, the Messi of the Breakers, or the players who are in that Messi category, usually going to be the imports, but they're leading the defense. So that's also a bit different. But again, if one of them was struggling defensively or wasn't given the defensive energy, A, they'll probably get less minutes under Marimo. But B, as you said, your role players do have a defensive skew to their mahi. So you can kind of absorb any player who, like, you've built the roster with players, like, it goes back to what we were talking about the Warriors in the Patreon podcast. The guys who are going to play through the middle, they're only going to play 15 minutes a game. So you don't want to go out and sign someone for 500K to then play 15 minutes a game, when that role can just go to a junior player. They just do it for far cheaper, as long as you're doing the defensive mahi and you're running hard. If you're not offering that efficiency in those limited minutes, you're not really going to play. And the Breakers are getting that. Like, those dudes you mentioned, they're not playing big minutes. But you might barely, like, McNaught doesn't play some games. You might not see Timmins play every game. Who was the other one?
Dan Fotu. All three of them have played less than half the game. Like, they've got on the court in less than half the games this season.
But when they are playing, they have a job to do. And you're only going to get more minutes by doing that job. And that job does skew towards defense. Because you can imagine, like, okay, it comes down to, like, these bench dudes getting minutes, and it's like, yeah, as you said, like, these players might start to flex on offense because it's kind of take the piss time, but you also might think that some other players alongside them for the Breakers might switch off defensively, because it is take the piss time, like, it's garbage time minutes, but that doesn't happen. And I don't, like, it's not like these are perfect similarities between the Breakers and Argentina football and the Warriors. It's just some similar ideas working through those different teams, and all of which is to say, those roots, the Turanga Waiwai of the Breakers' defensive identity, run deep, and they run all the way down the bench to those dudes in the role player positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just about Argentina or Breakers or Warriors. I think these are ideas that are applicable to every team sport. Like, every team sport and every team within every team sport, whether they're applicable because that team does it well, whether they're applicable because that team doesn't do it well. Like, they're kind of ideals that are universal in these kind of areas. So, and I think in the NBL especially, that's how you win. You just don't win if you don't have that. Because if you think about what sets the Australian league apart from other leagues, is I don't think Australia produces the most skilled players, and I don't think they get the most talented imports. There are definitely dudes who come over who are of NBA caliber, but the money isn't the same as what guys would get in China or in certain places in Europe. So the very best non-NBA players also, I think a lot of the guys who think they're right in the fringes of NBA are going to be playing G League and stuff like that and hovering around close to the action. The NBL is getting stronger and stronger, and it is definitely producing NBA players. But I think the overwhelming strength of the league and why it's such a difficult place to play is the strength of the guys at the end of the roster. And they're not the most talented players, but whether it's the Breakers or the many Aussie teams, there is a high caliber of Aussie/Kiwi battler who fills out the roster, who may not have the silky handles and they may not have the reliable jump shot, but they're going to play hard and they're going to play physical and they're going to give you as much as they can. And I suspect that is probably something that held up Dan Shamir when he was coach of the Breakers, as he came from coaching in Israel, where I think the import caliber is as good as it is in the NBL. But I think the local player caliber is probably lower. And so in that case, if the gap there is different, all you got to do is do the messy thing and just give the ball to, because like Derek Pardon played in Israel as well. A lot of Breakers imports have played in Israel. So there's a direct line of like, there's easy evidence there to say that the imports are of the similar caliber when they're the same players. So all you got to do is give the ball to your best player and he can probably burn whoever's marking him off the dribble, get to the rim, do the business. If that's not happening in the NBL because the weakest player in a lineup is better, then it's a different mentality that needs to be on show. And you do become more of like Argentina's defense versus Argentina's attack. And that's the flip that the Breakers have made from last season to this season. I think it's become less about looking at your best individuals and more about building up the baseline of having a solid core of a team and standards that flow throughout the entire roster and are upheld throughout the entire roster. I think that's the main difference between what we've seen under the previous coach and what we've seen under the new coach.
Just quickly, can you think of any examples of like because football, especially at the World Cup, for a variety of reasons, teams can be very successful with a defensive identity and a lot of the attack is based on counterattack.
And set pieces and penalties. Yeah.
What is the equivalent of that in some of these other sports like basketball, cricket, rugby league? Is there anything that comes to mind? Like we all know the styles of how teams play those sports, but is there an equivalent of that type of style of football that does seem like, whether it's the Premier League, like whatever league it is, whatever tournament it is, you'll find a good team who operates with that style. We're going to be really organized defensively. We're going to counterattack, and we're going to be really effective and efficient with our set pieces. I reckon the rugby union equivalent is fantastic scrum, fantastic line out, fantastic goal kicker. And you just kind of rack up your 3 points, 3 points, 3 points, 3 points. Get a scrum penalty, 3 points. Line out penalty, 3 points. And you just build it up, and then suddenly you're winning 23-15 or whatever it is, right?
12-9.
Yeah, even that
kind of thing.
Is there, like, it's not necessarily a full-on defensive focus because there are nuances to how they attack. Because in this rugby union example, we're going to attack your scrum. Yeah, sure, we might not play razzle-dazzle footy, but we are going to attack your scrum because we know we've got a better scrum, and if we attack your scrum, we'll get a penalty and we'll get 3 points. We're going to attack your line out. Whether it's your ball or our ball, we're in attack mode because we have a better line out. We know we have a better line out. Again, it's not about, we're going to pass it out to the winger and then we're going to pass it back over to the other winger and Dane Coles is there and he scores a try. There are bits of attack in there, but real strategic pockets of attack. Can you think of how that might apply to these other sports that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, probably quite easily. Like, I think there's certain, like, what's the word? Is it dichotomies? Whatever the thing is, like a sliding scale between two things at play in a lot of sports tactics. And just to use football as the example, I think the obvious one is attack versus defense, which is sort of how we started talking about this. But you need to be able to do both, right? You need to be able to attack and defend. Even if you're a better defensive team, you still got to be able to score a goal to win a World Cup knockout game or whatever. What were you saying?
Just to throw it up, and we've got a bit of football to get to, so we don't need to go deep into this, but a lot of the Blackcap stuff is, and a lot of the cricket stuff is, defense and attack.
Mm-hmm.
And all the cool stuff in Test cricket right now is based on attack, as you were.
Yeah, but that's not the only balance, especially in football. It's also possession versus out of possession. And, the formations will look slightly different there. You want to, and just in like the baseline generalization is that when you have the ball, you want to expand your things, so you cover more grounds and open up more passing lanes. When you don't have the ball, you want to contract so that there's fewer spaces and passing lanes for the other team to beat you through. And it's not just that. I think there's also like, I think probably what we're talking about here the most would be the dichotomy of control versus unpredictability. I don't know exactly what the word would be, but and there's a couple
razzle dazzle.
Yeah, razzle dazzle, flair. Just the things that's unplanned, spontaneity. Control versus spontaneity will do it, because you think probably, and there's different levels of this too. Like in a Premier League context, Jose Mourinho's Chelsea is the ultimate example of a team that they scored bundles of goals. People forget. You think about the Mourinho's penchant for being defensive and parking the bus. You had Didier Drogba scoring like 25 goals a season, like Frank Lampard scoring 20 goals a year from midfield. Like that was a team that scored heaps of goals and they thrashed teams. But they probably were also a very controlled team. Like they attacked through those ways, like you were talking about with the rugby example. Controlled, prepared attacks, where like it's structured, right? It's structured versus unstructured. Is another one of those things. This is very structured. There's also like, that's an example of a good team doing that. There's also like the Sam Allardyce type ball of just sit back, defend for a draw, and hope to poke one on the set piece, where the difference really is that one is still functioning at a much higher level because they've got better players and a better coach. But it's a similar thing on the terms of that scale. I think in a rugby example, like a team like maybe Argentina probably would be on the sort of middling thing, where it's like they play that way because it might give them a better chance of beating a better team, where it's set pieces, great kicking, not just off the tee, but from open play as well. That sort of thing. Whereas maybe the best, like the high performance example is South Africa when they're at their best, is always going to be kicking their goals and they're going to be targeting those scrums and lineouts and whatever, and making their tackles and things like that. Is probably like the version of, they don't have to play that way, but they do because they win that playing that way, and it's just what they do. I think you can find examples of that a lot. Definitely basketball. If you think about like certain teams love the grit and grindy stuff, and it's like, if we can keep a team under a certain score, we know we can beat them. Where others just want to throw up 3-pointers and be like, well, maybe we can't defend you, we can't contain you, but we might be able to outscore you and just win the game 100 in an NBA context, like 130 to 125 or something like that. We can't beat you 100 to 98, but maybe we can beat you the other way around. I think. I don't know. There's plenty of examples
just
of
like
both of those things, but
specifically because swing back around, this is the Breakers. They have a strong defensive identity, and we spoke about how that runs deep into their bench. So everyone in the squad is drilled with that defensive identity. How do they attack? Well, they're a good shooting team, and they've got some post players. So I don't think it's the most complicated attacking system. But if you get a shot, you're going to hit a shot, and you've got some big bodies down low who are going to beat the opponents up. And I don't think it's like, obviously I'm not a basketball expert, so I can't identify all the Popovich, Mawar specialty razzle dazzle, but I don't think their attacking scheme is overly complicated. They just know what they do well in attack, and they do that. But defensively, it's 10 out of 10 effort and all that stuff that we do love about Kiwi sport. So it doesn't seem like the Breakers are also like we're going to be real good defensively, but we're a super young, agile team, and we're going to run the floor every time either. Like Derek Pardon's not the most, he's not Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. Brantley can move a bit, but he's not Severis, right? Like those dudes aren't the most mobile characters. So you go down, Vodanovic, Liafa, McDowell-White, Glidden. None of those dudes are moving.
Timmins low,
Like they're not moving super fast. So it's not that you're coming up against a young, energetic team, maybe like the Memphis Grizzlies, where it goes to Ja Morant and he's bursting down the court. It's a different thing because I think that counterattack style is a bit of a basketball equivalent of what we're talking about, but the Breakers don't necessarily do that. They do what they do well in attack, but their defense is they might get a fast break every now and again, but I don't think their attack is designed around the fast break.
Yeah, they get a few because they are a team that gets some steals, and defensive pressure generally leads to transition buckets. Also, good rebounding. They're a pretty solid rebounding team. They're not the best rebounding team. I think the reason for that is they don't really have like a 7-footer out there just muscling people around. They're not actually the tallest necessarily. They're just a good, solid sized team with decent length in different positions, but not like there's no Steven Adams there. A lot of pick and rolls, a lot of, as you say, some post plays. I'm pretty sure I saw it that their pace of play is quite slow compared to other NBL teams. So that backs up exactly what you're saying there. They're not a team that plays that quick. They take their time in getting a shot away. I agree. I don't think they're a particularly intricate attacking sort of scoring team. I do think they're a very efficient scoring team, though, and that's because they have a few main ways they know how to get buckets, and also good shooters within that system. And that's all they got to do. If they score 85 points, they're going to win more often than not because they keep teams below 80 more often than not. I mean, 9 out of 16 games so far, they've kept the opposition below 80, and they won all those games. Every time they've kept a team under 80, under their average, they've won those games. They've scored enough points to get over the line. They've had a couple games where they've won conceding more, but also scoring a lot more. They've also had games like the two recent where they've conceded more than 80 and lost, haven't been able to keep up. They're going to score a certain amount, and against a evenly matched or similar team, they're going to be able to score a certain amount, but maybe not that much more. So it does but that's how they're built. They're built to keep a team below a certain point and do enough to beat them. And it works. Like you fit the thing around the players that you've got, and then you recruit players that make that system or that idea even better. They've done that, and that's how they win their games. It is quite similar to what you're saying, though. Less about counterattacks, more about set pieces and sort of sturdy, structured defense. I think they are a bit like that. Slower and deliberate compared to other NBL teams when they've got the ball, but good shooters and a couple of, patterns of play that how to get a shot out at the end of it. That's all they've got to be,
National League Women's Final this weekend, wildcard. Who are the teams involved?
We've got first place Eastern Suburbs against second place Western Springs, who have been the two best teams throughout the entire season. They occupied first and second on the ladder after every single round. So 14 games later, here we go.
Pillar to post. Was there anything from last weekend's games that you're taking into this final? Did you have any observations or learnings from those games last weekend ahead of this final?
Well, last weekend, curiously enough, Eastern Suburbs played Western Springs, so they got a little bit of a head-to-head. And I was, like I said this on the podcast, I'm pretty sure last week, I was quite curious to see exactly how the teams approached it. Like, would they just rest players and be like, prepare for the one that matters, and see how that goes, or would they want to make a statement, pick their best team, and get some form on the board and whatever, and lay down the gauntlet? both teams actually picked pretty strong sides. The Eastern Suburbs did rest Taylor O'Brien, their best player, so she went off injured the week before, so she was on the bench though in case of necessity. So that's a good sign for next week. I think very much a precautionary thing there, but other than that, it was pretty close. I think Emma Peinenberg also didn't play for Western Springs because she was captaining their under-17s team at the Nationals. So that happened too. But other than that, pretty much full strength teams. Eastern Suburbs did go with the back four instead of a back three, which is different, not completely unique for them, but I suspect probably Rachel Head comes back in for the final, or she does come back in the final one way or another, but I suspect maybe they go back to a back three when that is the case. And it might just have been more of a case if they're going to rest Head and they also had injuries to like Aria Blackler and Ella Finlay. Maybe they just didn't have enough centre backs left. So I don't know that there's anything necessarily tactically there, but it was a good game. Suburbs dominated for a lot of the first half, but it was 2-2 at half time because they twice took the lead and then twice were picked back by very good goals coming back the other way for Western Springs. And then with about half an hour to go, it was like Suburbs had taken the lead back. They were 3-2 up and Western Springs kind of pulled the plug. Like at a point where in a grand final, they would have been bringing on attacking subs and really going for it and chucking everyone forward and like, let's get that equalizer for the third time today. We've already done it twice in the first half. Let's get another equalizer and then push on and try win this thing. In the last game of the season, what they did instead was they subbed off their best defender, subbed off their best attacker, Lily Jervis and Rena Hirano, went on to sub off some more of their best players as the game progressed, and pretty much just kind of like ran some youth players off the bench. So they gave it 60 minutes of a big push, and then they were like, let's not get carried away here because next week is what matters. So there was a little bit of there's a little bit of just a halt in proceedings in the way it ended up, where it was a really well poised game. And if we're in that state in the final next week, this weekend on Sunday, we're going to be in a great place because that game's going to go ballistic from that point. But in the final round of the season, what you get instead, conservative substitutions and save it for next week kind of thing. So we'll see, because Suburbs did beat them earlier on in the season as well. It was 4-2, but Suburbs, I think, were 4-0 up relatively early in the second half and had played them off the park in the first half. The Eastern Suburbs are a team that starts lightning quick. They score a lot of early goals. And they're a hard team to stay in touch with. Like, they beat you early. Western Springs were considerably the second best team. Both occasions they've played them during the National League. I don't think anything pre-National League really matters at this point of the season. However, both times Springs did score a few goals and they were getting beaten, but they weren't getting they were getting well beaten, but they weren't getting well beaten on the scorecard necessarily, at least because they were able to stay in touch with their own strikes. That bodes quite well, because I do think Eastern Suburbs are the comfortable favourites coming into this game, but Springs have shown they can score against this team and they can hang close. And if you can hang close in a final, who knows what will happen.
Who are the best players for each team?
Definitely Taylor O'Brien, pending MVP for Eastern Suburbs, who scored 17 goals in 13 games because she didn't play the last game. And also, I think probably has double figures of assists as well. She's right up there. She's been absolutely incredible. Most interesting thing with her is whether they play her as a central midfielder pushing forward or whether they play her in the front three, because there is a decision to be made there. I'm not sure which way they'll go. I suspect she starts in the midfield, and then if they need a little bit more push going forward, they might move her into the front three when they make some substitutions. So that's an option. Also, got to say, Devon Jackson as a backup to Taylor O'Brien is pretty bloody good. She was the best player in the park in that game last week against Springs. They just couldn't hang with her. She was turning past players. She was shooting. She scored one goal. I think assisted one. It might have been both other goals. I forget exactly, but as you 1A, 1B, that combination has been untouchable all season. For Western Springs, there will be a lot of pressure on Lily Jervis as a centre-back, I think, who has been the best centre-back throughout the season and will need to also be at that same level if they're going to contain Eastern Suburbs. And then I said Rena Harana was their best attacker. Their Japanese forward. It would be her, and also right back Arisa Takeda. Their final game before they head overseas. I think they're going back to Japan, and then sounds like moving to Australia to play next year. I'm not sure, but their last games for Western Springs, they've been there for a few years and been star players in this league a few times. So definitely there'll be Takeda's set piece delivery will be big. Hirano's ability to pick a pass, but I think maybe in terms of this game, you might want to look towards American winger Sofia Garcia, who is lightning quick and wants to make that run in behind the defense. And I suspect, especially in behind the wing backs, that might be an area where they can really target Eastern Suburbs. I think that might be a tactical plan of theirs, is to get what in other sports they might refer to as the vertical threat going, like the direct pass in behind, running onto it. Garcia's come into a lot of she went on a bit of a goal drought mid-season. She's been in big form recently, so scoring a few goals, including a late winner against Canterbury a couple weeks back. So I think as far as this game goes, she's going to be very much a key player. Also, just chucking Emma Plannenberg as well, because I think she's likely to be the player making the passes. And as I said, she's still an under-17s player. Went to the under-20s World Cup. I don't think she played, but she was part of the squad, and she'll still be in the next under-20s wave. Incredibly good passer for someone so young. Really talented midfielder and a Kiwi player as well, since other than Jervis, the other Western Springs players I mentioned weren't. O'Brien and Jackson both are locals as well. So there you go. Player profiles.
Are they also like the young players? Because the National League is all about the young players rising up. So are they, like, no point asking you about the emerging young players if the best players are the emerging young players, you know what I'm saying? So is that the case, or is there a different superstar youngster to watch out on this final who, like, many of these players are likely to go beyond National League footy as soon as possible? So is that, how do you see that situation?
Yeah, the ones I mentioned are all relatively more experienced. Devin Jackson's probably the youngest of them at about 23, 24. Other than Peinenberg, because as I say, Peinenberg is captain the Western Springs under-17s at the Nationals last week. She's definitely the one for the suburbs to watch, although they do also have, I think, Lara Colby went to the under-17 World Cup, and there you go, Felder. And for Western Springs, who would for Eastern Suburbs, who would I pick there? I think Olivia Page went to the under-17 World Cup, as did Zoe Benson. Page is a midfielder / wingback, a good solid technical player. Benson is a skillful, sneaky attacker. There's definitely going to be a few players of that vintage in the grand final. There's definitely going to be opportunities for them as well to have influential say. Definitely is a highlight of the National League, is that you get that. There was it's an under-17 men's team named yesterday, which I will write about in the email on Friday, which included I think this is for the Oceania champs coming up in January. I think there were 5 players based overseas, so the rest of the squad all based in Aotearoa, and only one played National League. Jackson Cole from Christchurch United played 3 times off the bench in their last 3 games. It's the only one who played National League, whereas the women's under-17 World Cup team from earlier, almost all of them played National League. So there's definitely a difference there between the men's and women's competitions. And I think also just telling you, I just think it's harder for a 16-year-old boy to break a National League squad when the physicality is more of a factor. Whereas if you're a skillful 16-year-old women's player, you're probably going to be good enough to hang in the women's National League. And we see that. We've seen heaps of them.
Do you want to drop a Wellington Phoenix thing, or do you want to just finish with some Blackcaps Test squad?
Has it been named yet, or do I need to give you...
It's been named.
Oh, let's do that.
Well, like, I don't want to disrespect the Wellington Phoenix, but it might just be extenuating circumstances this week. Blackcaps Test squad, Southee selected.
Oh, yes, please.
Glenn Phillips, the G Philly, and Blair Tickner. So you've got Southee's name isn't actually in the list that the New Zealand cricket website's got, but their 15 players have been named. They've listed 14 names and they've done a big blurb about Southee as well. So let's just assume that he's there because he is there. So you got Southee, Michael Bracewell, Blundell, Conway, Henry, Latham, Mitchell, Nichols, Ajaz Patel, Glenn Phillips, Blair Tickner, Wagner, Williamson, and Will Young. So also interesting selections. I'd say you're getting Henry Nichols still there. He did seem to. I keep getting to this point where I feel like he's dropped out of the test team, but he played 6 tests this year and he's played at least like 4 or 5 tests every year of his career. So he's still there as he should be. Seam attack of Matt Henry, Tim Southee, Neil Wagner, and Blair Tickner. Spin attack
Tickner for Bolt, effectively, isn't it?
pretty much, yeah. And then spin attack, you got Ajaz Patel, Ish Sodhi, Michael Bracewell, then Glenn Phillips. I'm not necessarily banking on Glenn Phillips getting overs, but you've got 3 decent spinners there and Glenn Phillips as well. Of course, Kane Williamson steps down as captain, probably going to bowl a whole lot more off spin as a regular player. You're still going to have Will Young, Tom Latham opening the batting, Devon Conway, Kane Williamson, top 4. And then you've got Henry Nichols and Daryl Mitchell in that middle order. And a bit of Glenn Phillips maybe as well, just with a bit of oomph in that middle order for the Blackcaps team. What are your immediate reactions?
Well, love seeing Southee in there. I guess that means he's considered ahead of Mitchell Santner as a test bowler again, finally. Should have been the case a couple of years ago, but we're there now. I guess I don't know if is Will Somerville officially retired? I don't think anyone expected him to be there, but I think that relatively confirms that he's not going to be in that line of thinking moving forward. The other thing I notice here is no backup wicketkeeper. They do have their T20 wicketkeeper and their ODI wicketkeeper in the squad, but no specialist wicketkeeper in the team. I wonder who would get the gloves in a fight between Conway and Latham. I suspect maybe Latham's wicketkeeping fundamentals probably a few steps ahead.
I did think about that because I've obviously been big on Matty Green as a wicketkeeper for the White Ferns, and then you get Jess McFadden wicketkeeping in the ODIs, and it's obvious. Like I'm not, some sort of genius here, but there's a big difference between wicketkeeping for 20 overs and wicketkeeping for 50 overs, let alone wicketkeeping for a test. Like your workload more than doubles from T20 to ODI cricket, let alone what happens to test cricket. So basically, the longer the format, the more you need someone who is a specialist wicketkeeper because their whole psyche, their whole physicality is trained on being a wicketkeeper for at least 50 overs. Whereas Devon Conway or Matty Green wicketkeeping for 20 overs in a T20 game, it's not a different beast because it's not a beast. Like it's just it's literally less than, like it's half the
it's
work.
A dog on a leash.
Yeah, like
it's not a dragon, it's just a dog on a leash.
It's a pup. So that is to say, wicketkeeper rankings in the squad, Tom Blundell, Tom Latham, because Tom Latham's the ODI wicketkeeper, so he's comfortable wicketkeeping for a long time. Not to say that Devon Conway can't or hasn't, because he has played as a Plunket Shield wicketkeeper at stages. But that's just some made-up rankings right there. I think Wildcard, just off the top of my head, the selections are exciting. Because instead of a defensive spinner like a Somerville or a Santner, you've gone with Southee, who's an attacking spinner. He's a wrist spinner. And if you go to Pakistan with like 3 finger spinners, that's not going to work. That's boring as shit. So you need a wrist spinner, a leggy, and Glenn Phillips. I think he is just a good batter who can move through the gears of each format. But as far as a selection goes, he is an attacking, aggressive cricketer. It's not to say that Ish Sodhi or Glenn Phillips are certified first 11 players, but just with what we've been talking about today on today's podcast, both of them are aggressive selections compared to where we came from. Because I think talking about
first choice T20 players, aren't they? So
both have played Test cricket, though. Both are perfectly
both have played Test cricket.
Talented 4-day cricketers in Plunkett Shield. But in previous years, pretty much under the same regime, right? You would have gone with the finger
not under
spinner.
the Southee regime.
New era. It's where's Southee from? Monga Karamea. It's Monga Karamea ball cricket styles. Naughty North styles. I don't know, like how you label it. But my point here is that in previous years, the boring finger spinner would have been selected over Ish Sodhi, and the Phillips role would have probably gone to a more like just solid domestic batter, kind of a domestic battler, as opposed to this funky, quirky cricketer like Glenn Phillips. So just straight up as selections, not necessarily like team first 11 stuff, but squad selection. It's the start of a whole new era, Wildcat.
And they might not play. It's probably a better bet than not that they're there as backups and don't get in the 11s. But it tells you it's always exciting to see who the backup players are, because it tells you who they're where they think maybe the opportunities to get into the team or where they might need someone might be, because they haven't. Phillips isn't going to open or anything like that. It's very much there as like he would bat 4 or 5 or 6 in this team if he got in there. So that sort of tells you that much. I'm just trying to pick an 11 out of that, because I suspect you'll get Henry, Wagner, Southee. Don't think Techner will play, because you don't need 4 seamers. The obvious top 4 that you laid out before is there. I wonder if Nichols could be under a little bit of a threat. You did mention that it feels like his place is somewhat precarious, vulnerable. I think he's been basically dropped from the ODI team. At least he wasn't in the India series when he hadn't done that much wrong. He sort of got the sneaky Guptills without being Guptill. He's been a first choice Test player, and he's a very good Test player and quite a good player of spin as well, which probably has him in an all right position there. But what are you going to do? Not pick Daryl Mitchell, who's the top run scorer in Test matches of this year for the Blackcaps? You've got to pick him, especially because he also, if you need a 4th seamer, he's it. Like he can give you some wicket to wicket overs, just tidy 120, 125k an hour stuff. It's not going to be threatening, but he's gonna hit a line in length and get you through to the next new ball or whatever if you need be. You're going to have to pick at least Ajaz Patel. You probably want a second spinner, whether you can fit a second spinner and 3 seamers. And I mean, that's difficult unless the second spinner is someone like Michael Bracewell, in which case, I don't know. I think you can't pick Bracewell, Mitchell, and Nichols and Blundell, because there's not enough spots in the team unless you want to go in with 3 bowlers. So someone's missing out there. So if Sodhi and Phillips and Techner are all on the sideline, one of that other group it was going to have to be, and it's not going to be Tom Blundell, and it's not going to be Daryl Mitchell, which means it's probably Henry Nichols or Michael Bracewell. And I suspect you'd at least need another part-time option. You could pick Glenn Phillips as if I'm honest, I think Glenn Phillips is a better Test batter than Michael Bracewell. And he might even be a better Test bowler than Michael Bracewell. So neither of them should be picked as anything other than a backup, as like an alternative, a backup kind of part-time bowler. But there are some selection scenarios there at play, and I suspect the Blackcaps themselves don't know what they're going to do there. And we won't know until like the day of the game when they get a look at the pitch and get some ideas of conditions. But definitely some interesting selections there to be made. But I like that squad. I'm excited about that team. Blair Tickner's the least exciting of them, but I mean, he's a placeholder for Trent Boult. So, and there's no way he's the next guy up. There's not really another seamer who you'd say in Test match cricket is ready for that.
Oh, so
Jacob Duffy's been in
yeah,
good form, so maybe he would be the closest one. But
but that's where you get into the style of player you want. And
exactly, yeah.
I was just thinking about like, oh, okay, the worst thing about this Blackcaps Test squad is having Henry Nichols or Glenn Phillips as surplus. Like that's pretty healthy. Michael
Yeah,
Bracewell, like
that's good.
he's a backup batter. Okay, that's pretty healthy. Okay, Blair Tickner's in the squad, I reckon, for a reason, and that's because he hits the deck hard and he steams in. You've got your swing and nibblers, Southee and Matt Henry. Going to Pakistan, I think you also need, like, okay, you lose Neil Wagner for a test. What do you need? You need someone like him, if-ish. Blair Tickner's got that hostility. Whereas Jacob Duffy, dominating domestic cricket this summer, let me be honest about that. Like, one of the best Plunkett Shield bowlers, and now, like, he knocked the top off the Canterbury batting lineup in yesterday's Ford Trophy game. He's more of a swing bowler. And I think for these conditions, you probably want to go with Tickner as a backup. Like,
Because you're not dropping Southee, he's the captain now.
Exactly.
And yeah, Duffy's kind of like a combo between Southee and Henry. So like you've already got those two guys. You don't need someone else. I mean, the ideal option instead of Tickner would have been Lockie Ferguson, but there's a reason why it's not Lockie Ferguson. It's a bit too much of a risk to pick him at a point where you're not sure if he'll get through a test match without getting injured. And Ben Sayers is not ready. Adam Milne is also too injury prone, and those guys are seen more as white ball bowlers anyway. Ferguson has played a test match. He's played a session of a test match before he got injured. So he might, it's not like he would have declined the call up or anything, but I perfectly see, especially because the guy who's picked as the fourth seamer on the tour to Pakistan is probably going to be doing the bulk of their work in the nets. So you at least need someone who can give Kane Williamson a few extra hours of preparation or whatever.
I would say Blair Tickner of the squad is the least likely to play. And of course, New Zealand cricket squad announcements. Shout out to the lads who didn't make it. Trent Boult made himself unavailable for the tour, while Kyle Jamieson remains unavailable for selection as he recovers from injury. So I
forgot about Kyle Jamieson.
Like Blair Tickner's there, but also Kyle Jamieson's, he's in his Auckland hyperbaric time chamber doing a bit of cryo, getting a few vitamins into his system for his recovery. And of course, Trent Boult, BBL extraordinaire. He was bowling 140. I saw one delivery. It was 140 Ks.
Nice.
Which was like, bruh, shout out to you.
That clean Aussie air. The ball's traveling quicker. Slipping out of the hands.
That's the Niche Cast. We'll be back early next week with another episode of The Variety Show. Stay tuned. If you love Aotearoa Sport, plenty of Aotearoa sporting content coming at you via all channels of the Niche Cache. And yeah, love yourself. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Cha-cha.